I actually had my first trip in one of those motorcycle with a little sidecar. My mum and I were in the sidecar. I was 9 days old, and we were trying to get to Gloucester for New Year's Eve, and my dad was driving. It was the middle of winter, very cold, no freeways. It took almost a whole day to get there. I was born in a little town in Wales called Haverfordwest in December of 1957. I went to something like 11 schools, before I left high school. Started out in Wales, and my brother was born in Scotland. I lived in Cornwall and actually lived in Germany for a couple of years. So travelled quite a bit when I was a kid. When my dad left the Navy, we finally settled down in this little village outside of Gloucester. It's called Brockworth. Most of the population lives in what over here you would say was government housing, subsidised housing. Many of the fathers did not work, and the mothers certainly didn't work. Well, most towns in England have sort of little traditions and, things that have been going on for centuries. And we have what's called the Brockworth cheese roll. We have this really steep hill, and once a year on Whit Sunday, there's a cheese that's packed in a wooden crate, and it's rolled down the hill, and then people run after it. And the first person to get to the bottom of the hill, dead or alive, gets the cheese. And it's very bumpy. So you can literally see people start running down and then start sliding and rolling. And when you see the cheese comes down, it jumps like feet, like hundreds of feet, And at one time it went over the fence at the bottom of the hill. It just bounced over the fence. And, you get a lot of broken bones. And so it's all the medics are there ready to treat you. And but no matter what, you get the cheese if you're the first one down. So at that point, I lived in England for 5 years of high school. And then when I left high school at the age of 16, my parents at that point decided to emigrate to South Africa. The apartheid system was in place, and it was on the train that I really noticed it. The Africans had their own carriages, and there were no sleeper carriages. They were just carriages with wooden seats, and they travelled all the way from Cape Town to Johannesburg with no washing facilities or anything. I actually went to one of the first mixed-race concerts in Johannesburg. The Supremes decided to do a concert there, but only if the audience could be mixed. Concerts back then, it was like going to the opera. You dressed for it. So I actually wore a floor-length red evening dress, even though we got there on my boyfriend's motorcycle. He didn't even want to see the concert because they were, black people. And he couldn't understand my desire to want to see the Supremes, which back then was like one of the greatest Motown bands out there, But soon after I started working was when I really began to have strong feelings against it. I knew I would never stay there. I got fired from my first job because I didn't want to stop socializing with the young Indian girl that worked there. I kept having lunch with her, and in the end they just said, this is not the way it is, and maybe you'd fit in somewhere else a little bit better. After that, I went to Israel. I went to work on a kibbutz. I went with a friend. One of the most memorable things of that whole time was down by the Red Sea. We were sleeping on the beach. We were actually with the kibbutz. The kibbutz had arranged this trip for all the international people, all the volunteers. And I remember waking up in the morning in our sleeping bags. We didn't sleep in tents. We just slept on the sand in sleeping bags. And there was a camel right above me. It was amazing. And then we were all sitting up, and none of us was saying a word, but all these camels were walking around just loose. I was on the kibbutz for about 8 months, and then I ended up back in my hometown just for a few months. I decided to come to the States because I was living in Bristol at the time, and it was winter. It was cold and miserable. That's not where I wanted to end up. And so I decided I wanted to try out the States. So I started looking for a job as a nanny. and the standard publication to buy back then was called The Lady, and it's still being published. And anybody that wanted a nanny job knew that they could just pick this up and start looking for a job. And there were jobs for all over the world, but I only wanted to come to the States. I interviewed for this job and for this family that actually lived in England but had business in America, and they lived in Malibu, so I chose to go with them. I actually lived in a house that was built over the sand, and at high tide the water came up underneath my bedroom. It was phenomenal. I mean, here I am, I consider myself a little country girl from England, and I'm, living in this incredible house, and I'm actually driving their Cadillac, this 1965 white Cadillac with red leather seats. I would, drive up and down the coast doing their errands, their shopping, and I'd have the roof down, and oh God, it was amazing. Yeah, I drove a Honda Civic. So when they moved back to England, I was there for about 3 months, and I just decided I just wanted to move back to the States. It's just a lifestyle thing. I really like the lifestyle. Of course, I was a little biased because I lived in Malibu. And because there's this class system in England, we were part of the lower working class. I was expected to leave school at 15 or 16. In fact, the law changed while I was young from 15 to 16, so I had to stay on until 16. And it was expected that I would have some sort of job in a shop or a canteen, and I would get married when I was about 18 or 19 and start having children, at which time I wouldn't work. I would then be a stay-at-home mum. And while I knew that was all that was expected of me, I kind of also knew that that was not the way I was going to live. Having grown up in the Navy, I just loved travel, and I knew that I would travel when I was older. Everything I did was always been on my own. My parents have been unable to help me out financially in any way. I haven't lived a very wealthy lifestyle, but I've lived a great life and very happy with the way everything has been. I'm very glad I've traveled as much as I have. I think I'm definitely a better person for it.